So, what if I told you that pretty much everything we've been taught about how to learn is, well, wrong? Today, we're going to break down a framework that can seriously cut your learning time. We've distilled the key insights from some of the top experts out there to show you how to pick up any new skill so fast it'll feel like a superpower. So let's just jump right in with a direct question. Are you learning the wrong way? Because it turns out there's one single mistake that pretty much guarantees a nearly 100% failure rate, and chances are you're making it every single day, and you probably don't even realize it.
And that big mistake is something called theory overload. Okay, picture this. Your brain's working memory, the part that juggles new information, is like a tiny little 4-ounce bowl. Now imagine trying to pour an entire gallon of water into it. What happens? Right, most of it just spills right over the sides, totally wasted. That, in a nutshell, is theory overload. And it's the #1 reason we struggle to learn anything new and make it stick.
Now, to really get a handle on this, let's dive into what we're calling the theory overload trap. We're going to look at this really fascinating real-world case study that shows exactly why trying to learn more and do it faster can actually make you worse off. Okay, meet Sesh and Enzo. Both of them enrolled in the exact same online learning program, but their approaches were polar opposites. Sesh was like the hare in the story, you know? He just blitzed through 31% of the material in only 5 weeks. Enzo, on the other hand, was the tortoise. He was incredibly slow, covering just 20% of the course in over a year. So who do you think actually got the better results?
Well, the results are pretty shocking. Sesh, our so-called fast learner, actually saw his grades drop by 9%. Meanwhile, Enzo, the one who took his sweet time, saw his academic performance just skyrocket by a massive 30%. Sesh was a classic victim of theory overload. He crammed so much theory into his brain so quickly that his performance literally collapsed. Enzo got it. He understood that when it comes to learning, less is often way more.
So, if just jamming more theory into our heads is a recipe for disaster, what actually works? Well, the answer is to do something that feels a little counterintuitive. You have to embrace the productive struggle. The solution isn't about finding the easiest, most frictionless path. It's about finding the right kind of difficulty, the kind that forces your brain to actually sit up, pay attention, and build stronger connections.
This brings us to this really cool concept from neuroscience called the generation effect. And the idea is actually pretty simple. The harder you have to work to come up with an answer, the deeper that answer gets wired into your brain. So think about it. That moment when you're struggling to recall a fact or a name, you're not failing. You're literally forging a stronger memory in real time. Your brain doesn't just tolerate this struggle, it absolutely thrives on it.
And this whole idea of struggle is part of a bigger process that we can call the experiential cycle. The best way to think about it is like learning archery. First, you have to do something, right? You have to take the shot. That's the experience. Second, you have to observe the result. Where did the arrow actually land? And third, you analyze what you need to change to get closer to the bullseye. This creates this powerful feedback loop of experimenting and adjusting. Without that loop, you're just blindly shooting arrows into the dark and hoping for the best.
Okay, so we get it. We need to avoid overload, and we need to embrace the struggle. But how do we actually start? Well, this next section is all about the first key strategy. Find the vital 20%. This is all about being a ruthless filter for information before it even gets a chance to overwhelm your brain.
And this is where the famous 80-20 principle comes into play. In almost any skill you can think of, a tiny fraction of the knowledge, we're talking about 20%, is going to give you 80% of the results. The rest? It's mostly just noise and obscure details. You want to learn guitar? 4 basic chords will let you play thousands of popular songs. You want to learn a new language? Mastering the most common 1,000 words will cover the vast majority of your daily conversations. The secret is finding that vital 20% and just hammering it home first.
And once you've found that critical 20%, you need to compress it. Our brains can really only juggle about 4 new ideas at any one time. So what do top learners do? 3 things. First, selection. They isolate that vital 20%. Second, association. They connect the new idea to something they already understand. And third, chunking. They group all those connected ideas into simple models or metaphors. It's exactly how a chess grandmaster sees the whole board as a series of patterns, not just a bunch of individual pieces.
All right, so we've filtered our theory down to the essentials. Now we have to actually turn it into a real skill. This section is all about practicing smarter, not just putting in more hours, because how you practice is so much more important than how long you practice.
And this gets us to the huge difference between aimless practice and deliberate practice. See, most of us just do aimless practice. We kind of just repeat the whole skill over and over again, kind of hoping we'll get better. But the pros, they use deliberate practice. They find their single weakest component, like that one specific chord change on the guitar that's always tripping them up, and they drill just that one tiny piece until it becomes completely automatic. It's all about targeting your weaknesses, not just endlessly repeating your strengths.
So how do you actually balance learning the theory with doing the practice? Well, here is an incredibly powerful rule of thumb to keep theory overload at bay. For every single hour you spend learning new information, you should spend at least 5 hours actively practicing and applying it. That 1-to-5 ratio is key. It ensures that knowledge doesn't just pass through your brain, it actually gets built in.
We're at our final section, and this is the one where we lock in all that learning for good. See, it's not enough to just practice. We have to actively process the information and then give our brains the time and space to consolidate it. This is how we make knowledge permanent.
You know, one of the absolute best methods for this actually comes from how they train doctors in medical school. It's a simple loop called see one, do one, teach one. First, you watch an expert perform the skill. Then, you immediately try to do it yourself. But the real magic, the part that seals the deal, is step 3, teach one. When you are forced to explain the skill to someone else, heck, even just explaining it out loud to an empty room, your brain has to organize that information in a totally new and deeper way, and that's what cements it in your memory.
And this brings us to what might be the most counterintuitive part of learning, rest. We're all taught to think of rest as downtime, as doing nothing. But for our brain, it's one of the most active and essential parts of the entire learning process. It's kind of like a farmer letting a field lie fallow for a season to regain its nutrients. Without rest, your brain simply cannot consolidate what you've worked so hard to learn.
And it turns out there are 3 crucial levels of rest for learning. On a micro level, just pausing for 10 seconds allows your brain to replay the new information at 20 times the normal speed. It's amazing. Then, after a long 90-minute focus session, a 20-minute deep rest break is absolutely essential. And finally, a full 8 hours of sleep is where the deepest, most profound memory consolidation happens, locking in all your hard work.
So what's the game plan? First, we have to avoid theory overload by learning less but doing it more deeply. Then, embrace that productive struggle to build stronger memories. We have to filter for that vital 20% of knowledge before we even start. Then, practice deliberately on our weakest points. And finally, use rest to lock it all in. So that brings us to our final question for you. Looking at your own habits, if you could only change one single thing about how you learn, what do you think would have the biggest impact?